Hello and welcome to the Idiot Book Nook. My name is Blazewing and my pronouns are they, them.
I am the Reading Dragon, and my pronouns are she, her.
My name's Lady Punnet. My pronouns are primarily she, her, sometimes they, them. Today is a she, her day.
And I'm Crittershy. My pronouns are sometimes she, her, sometimes they, them. Today's a her day.
Welcome to this episode of the Idiot Book Nook, where we're going through Chapter 9 of The Thief from the Queen's Thief series by Megan Whalen Turner. But before we get into that, if you'd like to follow us on social media, you can do so at lanktr.ee/idiotbooknook. You'll be able to find links to our podcast, to our YouTube, to the Twitch, where we stream on Wednesday mornings. You'll be able to find links to all of our individual projects and all of that jazz. Feel free to go check us out, check out what we've got going, come and get to know us a little bit. With that being said, is our narrator ready?
Yep.
Excellent. We bring you Chapter 9 of The Thief.
Hold on, I have to fix my font a little bit.
One moment while the narrator fixes their font.
Technically, my eyeballs were fixed. They shot laser beams in them.
Superpowers!
They shot laser beams in the narrator's head.
You're not allowed to do that voice ever again.
Yeah, no.
Why?
That was creepy. Like, fuck.
Like, creepy as in too close to, like, the actual character, or?
Close to the character.
Yeah. Alright. Where I go? I slept through the day with sunlight and blue sky filtering through my closed eyelids. After a cold, wet night in the temple maze, the sun was contentment itself, and I didn't wake until it was setting. I had been dreaming again of the lady in the chamber. Her hair was held away from her face by a string of dark red stones set in gold. She used a swan feather pen to put a second mark by my name. She seemed concerned for my sake. I was about to ask where was the temple, where was the altar, and the statue of the goddess, when the smell of coffee woke me. I groaned as I woke. My eyes were still closed as I stretched my muscles, my arms over my head. There was someone...
Sound effects.
There was someone standing above me. Sophos, I thought. He put a little cup of coffee in my outstretched hand.
God bless you.
There's an S on that.
God's bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I said to him.
You're welcome.
Said the Magus dryly.
When you have returned to the land of the living, some questions for you.
I scowled and took my time over the coffee. It was thick and sweet, and I was sorry when I reached the grounds at the bottom of the cup. Magus had many questions. First, though, he asked me to describe my night in the temple. I told him about the corridors mined out of solid rock, with their walls sagging in to make arched ceilings. I told him about the trap and how I'd almost been caught in it. I didn't tell him about the antechamber that I recognized in my dreams. I didn't really believe that myself, and only reluctantly did I tell him about the pool of bones.
How many bones?
He wanted to know. Ghoul, I thought.
The skulls were in pieces. I saw parts of 4 or 5, maybe more. Does it matter?
My predecessors came here, I think.
The Magus explained.
But as far as I know, he came alone. The other bones would be older. I wish I knew.
He murmured.
Knew what?
Knew why whole expeditions have disappeared after this goal.
Wish I knew.
I said.
How the bones came to be piled in the back of the maze and none of them left in the trap at the front.
The Magus raised his head to look at me, and then raised his eyebrows as well.
An astute observation.
He said.
Somebody moved them?
I shrugged. I didn't know. Maybe in 500 years, every thief that came here had been as smart as myself, but I found that difficult to believe. I looked around the campsite as a different thought occurred to me.
I'd move camp if I were you.
I said.
Why?
The river turns here. We're right across from the falls. If the water came back faster than it did last night, it would jump that falls and land on top of you. You and Pole and Sophos would be washed across the sandbar and end up somewhere downriver, probably drowned.
The Magus nodded.
We'll move. Eat some dinner.
While I ate, I asked Pole if he had any rope or twine. I needed a piece longer than the ones I'd had in my pockets. After dinner, I changed back into my clothes of the night before. Everything but one pocket lining had dried in the sun while I slept. Just after midnight, the river sloshed in its bed and disappeared. It was as magical as the second time as it was the first. I waited longer for more of the water to be gone from the maze before I took the line that Pole offered me and stepped into the pool. I slipped through the stone door in the bluff and found one of my shoes. It was bobbing in a little bit of water still trapped behind the door. The other shoe had been dropped by the receding water in a corner of the antechamber. I put them on and grimaced with distaste. They were cold. I lifted the locking bar in the inner door and stepped into the maze. By the time I had opened the locks on the metal doors, my body heat had warmed the shoes on my feet and I had forgotten them. The locks are not difficult things to open. They all work on the same system. Little tumblers keep the lock closed in this position and open in that position. The more tumblers you have, the more expensive the lock. But if a thief can open a lock with 4 tumblers, he can open one with 6 or 8 or 12 almost as easily. He just uses a longer fake key with adjustable strikes to move the tumblers. If you want to keep something safe, I say hire a guard, at least until someone invents a better lock. Or hide your treasure where no one will find it. That's what most people do. Being able to find valuables in boxes hidden behind bed frames, being able to move through a building with no one the wiser, those are more important skills for a thief than opening locks. Those, and a good head for heights. People don't usually hide their emerald earrings in their cellar. I blocked open both of the metal doors with stones I brought from the riverbank and wandered through the maze to the pool of bones. I stood and looked at it for a while, with the light of my lamp reflecting off the dark water. This was the one place in the maze that might hold Hamayati's gift. And I didn't want to look. I paced the length of the pool a few times before I started at one end and raked my fingers through the cold water, disturbing silt and bone. I found a ring, 2 rings, gold buttons, silver buttons, brass buttons, fibulas, brooches. The thieves who had come to this place had been a wealthy bunch, but none of them had found what they came for. The brooches were set with lapis and obsidian and a variety of other stones, but none of them was Hamachi's gift. There was one ring that held a large green emerald engraved with a design I couldn't make out in the dim light. It was too big for my finger. I slipped it over my thumb. The rest of the things I'd found I shoveled back into the pool, offerings to the gods. I left that corridor and began the tedious work of measuring the maze. Using the line Pole had given me, it took all night. I was just finishing when the panic came back. I coiled the rope with shaking hands and hurried towards the exit of the maze. By the time I reached the doors, I was running, and I almost collided with the first one. It was closed. My stone block had not stayed in position, even though I had placed it carefully and wedged it firmly so that it would hold against the returning Aractus. I fumbled for my tools and unlocked the door. When I started for the next one, which I could see was also closed, my foot kicked the stone door lock, lying where it had been, pushed by the swinging door. My other foot kicked the pry bar, which I had dropped and forgotten the previous night. That was a more painful impact, but I didn't stop. I limped on as quickly as I could to the far door, through the maze, and through it and out of the maze. My exit was perhaps a little more dignified than the night before, but not much. The Magnus was waiting for me.
Any luck?
He asked.
None.
Damn it.
No, it says none, I said.
Oh, sorry. I thought I already said that. I must have not had my mic on. Damn push to talk. I said.
Damn it. What are you doing all night?
Tripping over pry bars.
I told him.
Where's my breakfast?
After I ate, I asked a Magus if he had any paper. I knew he had a journal that he kept record of our days in.
Did you want to write a letter to your sweetheart?
He asked.
What makes you think my sweetheart can read? Shut up and give me a piece of paper.
The Magus laughed and pulled himself up to walk to his backpack, lying beside his bedroll. He tore a sheet from the back of his journal and flourished it in front of me.
What?
I
hear and obey,
he said.
which is more than you have ever done.
I snatched the paper out of his hand and noticed Sophos staring in astonishment.
What are you looking at?
I asked him.
Am I Sophos?
I can't remember who's Sophos.
I think that was Blazewing.
Oh, okay. Nothing.
He answered.
He is merely astounded by my good humor, Jen,
Explained the Magus.
and my ready compliance to your grumpy request.
To Sophos, he said.
I have the highest respect for a craftsman, and Jen is nothing if not that. Although he doesn't bring back Camaith's gifts tonight, the three of us may as well drown here as go back and tell the king that we have failed.
The three of you?
I asked pointedly.
What happens to me?
Oh,
Said the Magus, waving one hand.
you would have drowned in the maze.
A chill shivered down my spine. I turned to the paper in my hand without speaking. I used a charcoal stick from the fireside to mark out the measurements I'd stored in my head. The maze took shape under my hands while the Magus looked silently over my shoulder.
What's that?
He pointed with a finger at a dark smudge.
A mistake.
I answered.
I keep getting my measurements turned around. That big piece of obsidian that I told you about, though, is right there.
I marked it with another smudge.
If I were here to get rich, I'd be a happy man. How long is the rope?
He asked after a pause.
About 30 feet.
I told him.
Is it Blazewing?
Oh, sorry, I thought that was the Magus talking. Never mind.
30, exactly.
Pole volunteered.
So this space here
The Magus put his finger down on the page.
might be as much as 8 feet by 6 feet?
I think so.
I told him.
You think there's a room hidden?
I don't know. Every wall is 2 feet or 3 feet thick. There could be a hidden storage space anywhere. And then there are the outside walls of the maze. A secret way could lead to a tunnel a mile long. I just don't know.
You've checked those walls?
Every inch.
I said, frustrated. The Magus squeezed one shoulder.
If there were a door, you would find it, Jen.
He said, and I shrugged. I was pessimistic of finding anything hidden in any of the seamed walls of the maze. There was no door. I was positive of it.
Did you look among the bones?
He asked quietly. He hadn't suggested it the night before, although the necessity was obvious to both of us.
Yeah.
Find anything?
I looked down at the ring still hung around my left thumb. He looked as well and whistled. In the sunlight, I could see that the emerald was flawed, milky white on one side. The seal engraved in it was a curving fish, maybe a dolphin. The white flaw was a breaking wave. The Magus leaned over me to lift it off my thumb.
The writing on the ring itself is in the old style, pre-invader. Whoever wore it here must have had it in his family for many generations.
Or he lost it here a long, long time ago.
The Magus agreed.
I rolled too far down. Or that. I'll put it in my bag so that it doesn't get lost.
You will not.
I said. The ring didn't belong in a bag. It belonged on a finger. My finger. The Magus looked down at me, and I stared up at him. Pole rose as well.
If you want a seal ring,
I said louder than I intended.
go get one yourself.
Oh, very well.
The Magus capitulated with a smile, handing it back to me.
Grave robber.
I laughed at that.
I'm trying to rob a god's temple, and you think I should worry about the ghosts of a few dead men?
I slipped the ring back over my thumb and went to lie down. With the image of the maze in my head, I slept. I dreamed again. In the antechamber, the woman in white called me by name. Of course, she had written my name on her scroll. I knew that, yet hearing her say it out loud tore away a comforting pretense of anonymity. I hesitated, and she called me again.
I am here.
I answered.
I think this was me as well. Many have sought twice in the maze, and yet gone away.
The mysterious dream woman was actually Lady Punnet, but cool.
Oh, I'll let Lady Punnet do that line then.
Many have sought twice in this maze and yet gone away.
she said quietly.
If you go 3 times into the maze, you will not leave with what you seek. Without what you seek,
I nodded my head.
you will go a 3rd time.
Yes.
There is no shame if you did not.
She paused, as if she had wandered as far as she could from a script that was written out for her.
Who brings you here?
She asked.
I bring myself.
I whispered.
Then will you go?
Yes.
Be cautious.
She said as she turned and picked up her white pen.
Do not offend the gods.
I woke before she looked up from the 3rd mark beside my name. It was still more than an hour before sunset. The sand under me was warm with the day's heat, and I was comfortable. I stayed where I was with my eyes closed and thought about the stones I'd used as door blocks the night before. They shouldn't have moved. I had been very careful. Had someone removed them? A woman in white? A little voice inside me laughed. Of course she knew my name. She was a dream, something made of my own imagination. If I knew my name, so did she. But those blocks hadn't been moved by a dream. I opened my eyes in slits and looked over at the Magus. He and Pole were sitting by the cold firing, talking quietly so as not to wake me, about some army campaign they had fought together. Pole wouldn't have moved the blocks. He didn't particularly care if I found the stone, but he was no enemy to the Magus. The Magus could have moved the blocks, but I couldn't see why he would. I had an ugly image of him sealing the outer door of the maze and refusing to let me out until I produced Hamayate's gift, but it was a nightmare, nothing real. The Magus, in spite of his dogged pursuit of world sovereignty for Sunis, was a reasonably honest man. When I'd accused him of intending to knife me in the back after I'd delivered Hamayate's gift, he'd been insulted and angry. He'd steal an entire country, but he wouldn't murder one dirty little thief. Nor would Pole, unless the Magus ordered it. Nor did I need to worry about Sophos as an assassin. Amvites I would worry about, but we left him on the far side of the dystopia. So who had moved the blocks? No one, I finally decided. The doors were heavier than I'd allowed for. The wet stone slicker. I'd have to be more careful, that was all. My stomach rumbled for lunch that I'd missed, and I sat up.
Welcome,
said the Magus.
Would you like some diced beef? Would you like some dried beef, or some dried beef for lunch?
Oh, I'll take stuffed pigeons and sauce, thank you. And some decent wine to drink. None of that cheap stuff, please.
That wasn't on the menu.
The Magus handed me an almost empty paper package of dried beef and half a loaf of bread.
Enjoy your meal,
he said. The bread was 4 days old and as difficult to chew as the beef. I worked my way through my portion listening to Pole and the Magus go on discussing their campaign. I looked around for Sophos, but he was nowhere to be seen.
I sent him after more wood.
The Magus broke off to tell me. Knowing Sophos, I thought that he had probably fallen in the river.
That poor boy. Can he swim?
I wondered out loud. The Magus glanced over at Pole, who shrugged his shoulders. Without another word, they both stood up, brushed off the sand of the seats of their trousers, and went to look for Sophos. Once they were gone, I flipped open Pole's bag and helped myself to another slab of dried beef, which I stuffed in one pocket. The magus would have given it to me if I'd asked, I think. But I'd given up asking for extra food since the scene with the riding crop.
Kinky.
Listen here, what I do on my own weekends is my business.
Not in my Christian mind server, guys.
Ma'am, this is a Wendy's.
Speaking of, I'll talk about that after. Hold on.
All right. Sophos came over the ridge behind me, bringing a bundle of brush.
Where is everyone?
Where is
Looking
everyone?
for you! Sorry, what was that? Looking for you!
I explained that they thought he drowned. He sat in a huffy silence for the next half hour until the magus came up the riverbank from downstream. When he saw Sophos, he stepped back around the curve in the bank and must have waved to Pole because both of them reappeared. They sat down beside us, and Sophos, staring straight ahead, said pointedly,
I swim very well.
Is there any dinner?
I asked. So we ate and waited for the river to disappear. I had moved away from the fire to sit in the dark. Sophos moved with me.
Jen,
He asked,
can you hear the river coming inside the temple?
I thought about my panic on the previous 2 nights. Maybe my ears heard what my head didn't understand.
I don't know.
I had to answer, and I told him about the panic. I told him about the sliding stone door blocks as well.
Do you think
He stammered.
there's somebody in the maze with you?
I wish he hadn't so obviously substituted somebody for something. Not that I thought ghouls and ghosts were real, but they were easier to believe in when standing in the cold, dark, wet hole in the ground. My 3rd night in the maze, I remembered to pick up the pry bar, lying abandoned in the entranceway to the maze. Then I went directly to the corridor through the middle of it. I searched fingertip by fingertip every stretch of its inner walls from one end of it to the other, and then as nearly as I could tell, I circled through the maze to the far side of the same wall and searched it too. It took most of my night, and I found nothing. I went to the pool in the back of the maze and waded through it, bones occasionally crunching under my feet despite my care. I searched the rear wall of the maze and again found nothing. As I searched, Sophos' unspoken words came to haunt me. Something in the maze with you. I broke off every few minutes to look over my shoulder and cursed Sophos for bringing up something I didn't want to think about. The flame in my lamp sputtered once, and the panic swept down on me. I went back to the middle corridor and stood there while the panic rolled over me, sweeping and pushing me towards the exit of the maze. I knew that there was still time before the maze filled, and I refused to admit defeat. I planted my feet and actually held onto the rock for support. I intended to find Hamaiti's gift, and if I couldn't, or if I suspected it was not there to be found, I told myself I might as well drown. Well, after all, was there to go back to? The panic receded, and I looked at the wall in front of me. There was bulges of rock and ripples where it had flowed and hardened, but there was no crack or fissure that would reveal a doorway or conceal a hidden spring. I searched through the middle section of the wall until frustration made me swear out loud and swing my pry bar against the solid rock. I hurt my hand. The pry bar landed, ringing like a bell, on the stone at my feet. I was lucky it hadn't bounced off the rock and hit me in the face. I turned around and sat down against the wall, nursing my sore hand and wiping tears off my face. The panic was gone, but I was still tempted to try and make my way out of the maze. I don't know if I could have left then or not. I didn't stay because I was trapped. I stayed because I was too stupid to go. Maybe all the owners of the bones in the back of the maze had been drowned by their own stubbornness as well. I was facing the giant piece of obsidian, and I wondered how many had stayed there before me. The Hephaestal glass was beautiful, reflecting the light of the lamp that was sitting beside me. My own reflection was there as well, distorted by the bumps and ridges of the obsidian. I watched the image of the burning flame for a moment, thinking again how much like a window at night the glass was, reflecting the house lights when the world was dark, keeping the world on the far side of the glass invisible. How much like a window, or like a door. I stood up, forgetting my sore hand. The piece of obsidian was easily the size of a double doorway, although veins of solid rock ran through it. I brushed my hands over the slick black surface and pressed my nose against it, trying to see through. There was nothing but blackness. I picked up my pry bar and, holding my breath, slammed it into the glass. The pry bar rebounded, chipping free a small chunk of the obsidian. I turned my face away and swung again harder. Larger pieces of glass broke off, and when I turned back, there were long cracks radiating in a star shape from where the point of my pry bar had struck, and there, where the cracks intersected, was a little hole no bigger than a button. I pushed my finger through it, careful of the sharp edges, and wiggled in the open space on the other side. Turning my face again, I swung the pry bar over and over against the glass door until I felt something break loose and shatter on the stone floor. I looked and saw that a piece larger than any armored breastplate had dropped out and broken to fragments at my feet. There was dust in the air that stung my eyes. I lifted up my lamp and let the light fall through the hole before me. There was no room beyond, but there was space that my calculations had said must be behind the opposite wall of the corridor. I looked back for a moment, puzzled by my mistake. Then I looked again, through the hole in the obsidian. There was a staircase, 12 steep steps, leading up. The room above was outside the range of my small light. With a more judicious taps of my pry bar, I enlarged the opening between the veins of solid rock. Pieces of obsidian larger than platters broke off, and I lowered them carefully to the ground. Suddenly, one tap of my hammer overcame the door all at once. The veins of the stone crumbled into fist-sized rocks, and a huge piece of glass slipped free and crashed down. Shards flew like missiles. I jumped back and covered my face with both arms. When the dust settled, I dropped my arms and looked through an irregular opening, nearly as wide as a double doorway, to stairs that filled the space beyond. They were about 8 feet wide, as the Magus and my map had predicted. I had no idea, though, how they came to be on that side of the corridor, where the wall was only 2 feet thick. I dropped my lamp again, but it was still burning. I had dropped my lamp again, but it was still burning. I scooped it up and picked my way through the rubble of obsidian and the stone and climbed up the stairs. The lamp was a round, fat one, a little longer than it was high, flat on the bottom, with 2 more flat spots on one side where I had dropped it. It had a hint of a spout with a hole for a wick, but no handle. It sat in the palm of my hand, the brass growing warmer and less heavy as the oil inside burned away. There was very little oil left by then, and the lamp sat lightly. I held it above the level of my eyes so that it might cast its frugal glow ahead of me. There were no obstacles. I climbed with my eyes on the stairs, so I did not realize until I reached the top and looked up that the room was filled with people. They stood all loose in a loose collection on either side of an open aisle. They were perfectly silent, and none looked towards me. But it was impossible that they could be unaware of my arrival. The obsidian crashing to the floor had made enough sound to wake the dead, but no one moved. I was in plain sight, but no one looked at me. Finally, I realized that the only movement in the entire room was the movement of the shadows thrown by my light. As my hand shook and I began to breathe again, they were statues. As I walked among them, I could see that their perfection made them unreal. Their skin was lighter or darker, but always unblemished. Their faces symmetrical, their eyes clear. There were no scars, no bent limbs, no squints in the eyes. I wanted to touch the perfect skin, but I didn't dare. I settled for brushing my finger across the cloth of one robe. It was a deep blue and had a pattern like running water woven into it. The man wearing it was tall, taller than I was, of course, but taller than the magus as well. Away from the aisle towards the back of the room, I found the woman in the white peplos. I knew her now, even without her feather pen and scroll, and I smiled in recognition. She was Moira, who recorded men's faith. How she had come to my dreams, I didn't wonder. I had found her image in the world, and somehow I thought all mysteries were explained. I left her and turned towards the altar, but found that I was mistaken. There was no altar. There was a throne, and sitting on it was the statue of the great goddess Hephaestia. She wore a robe cut from deep velvet, its reds darkest in the heart of its folds, and brighter across the ridges. Her hair was held back from her face by a woven ribbon of gold set with red rubies. Resting on her knees was a small tray that held a single stone on its mirror surface. I stepped forward until I could reach to take the stone. Then, with my hand extended, I stopped and was perfectly still as I watched the pattern of light on the velvet robe shift with the movement of my breath. My heart was like stone inside my chest. This was not an image carefully made in imitation of Hephaestia amid a statuary garden of gods. This was the great goddess, and she was surrounded by her court. My extended hand began to shake. I closed my eyes as I heard the rustle of cloth behind me, wondering if it was the midnight blue gown with the water pattern as Oceanus checked to see if I had left any dirt. I opened one eye and looked up at the great goddess. She looked beyond me, impassive, distant, not unaware of my presence, but unmoved by it. There was a murmur of voices behind me, but I made out no words. In the corner of my vision, a figure moved forward. I hadn't seen him before, though I should have looked. His skin was not black like the Nimbians. It was a deep brownish red, like fired clay, like that of the ancient people who'd left their portraits on the walls of ruins in the islands in the Middle Sea. His hair was dark like his half-sister's, but her hair reflected the light in the flashes of gold and auburn. His was black like charcoal. His face was much narrower, his nose sharper. On one cheek was a light scar of a burn mark, shaped like a rounded feather. He was smaller than the other gods, dressed in a tunic of plain gray.
You have not yet offended the gods.
Eugenides, the god who had once been mortal, spoke at last.
Except perhaps Aracthus, who was charged to let no thief enter here. Take the stone.
I did not move. The patron of thieves came closer. He moved to his sister's right hand and laid his own across it.
"Take it,"
he said. His words were strangely accented, but not so very different from my way of speaking. The Magus was not here to tell me how it compared with the languages of the civilized world, and I had no difficulty understanding the god's instructions. I just couldn't move. My nerves hadn't failed, I suppose. It wasn't so much that I was afraid of retribution, of lightning bolts that might follow. It was religion that had seeped into my childhood without my knowing it. The thought of stealing something from the great goddess was too awful to contemplate, and I could not do it. Neither could I turn and flee. I was a little surprised at how stubborn I was turning out to be, but I wouldn't leave without the gift. It mattered too much. Distantly, I heard the swish and rattle of small stones as the water began to flow down the riverbed overhead, but I remained as immobile as the gods that I had mistaken for statues. Only my eyes moved as I looked from the small gray stone on the tray to the hand of Eugenides to his face. And then, because I thought as if I were dying, I would do something that very few had done since the world was made, I looked again into the eyes of the great goddess, and for a moment she looked back at me. That was enough. Released from paralysis, I leaned forward a little further and plucked the stone off the mirrored tray. Then I turned and I ran. With the sound of water roaring in my ears, I ran for the staircase past the gods who watched impassively. I lifted my head only once to look for Moira, but she was hidden in the crowd. When I reached the staircase, I jumped the first 2 steps and stumbled down the rest. I thumped against the wall across the bottom step and dropped my lamp. I didn't stop to pick it up. After 3 nights in the maze, I didn't need it. Brushing my hands against the wall, one with Hermione's gift clutched in my fist, I ran on. When the wall on my left ended, I turned left, then right again, then left, and left again, and splashed towards the door which I had wedged open, and which had again closed. I imagine Aractus somewhere making a gesture, forcing a little more water through the bluff to move my blocks. He might yet succeed in trapping me. The water coming through the grill in the door washed against my legs, 6 inches deep. How many thieves, I wondered, had reached this point and still drowned? Would my bones end in the pool at the back of the maze? Would the obsidian door be restored and the gift returned to its mirrored tray? If I had dropped my tools, they would have disappeared into the water. But I did not fumble. The water beyond the door was 12 inches deep, and was almost 2 feet deep before I reached the next door. I worked the lock and stepped back as the water forced the door open. In the antechamber, the water was waist deep, and the waves made by the water thundering down in a solid pillar from the hole in the ceiling were as high as my chest. The pillar carried a glint of moonlight from above, but the chamber was as dark as the maze. I slid cautiously around, close to the wall, but I slipped at the top of the stairs leading to the outer door and slid down the underwater until I was pinned, unable to breathe, against the stone door. I fought to turn over, to get some purchase in order to lift my head, but the river held on my back, head down. I scrabbled with my hands until I could find no leverage to move my body against the force of the water. The river foamed around me. I ran out of air. Darkness that was deeper than the river swallowed me up.
And that is Chapter 9 of The Thief from the Queen's Thief series by Megan Whalen Turner. I want to thank you all for joining us for this chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. We will be back next episode to talk about it and things that we have learned. Kind of the talking points. But before we close out this episode, if you'd like to follow us on social media, once again, you can do so at linktr.ee/idiotbooknook. you'll be able to find links to our podcast, to our YouTube, to the Twitch, and all of our individual projects. For this episode of the Idiot Book Nook, my name's Blaze.
I am the Reading Dragon.
I'm Lady Punnet.
And I'm Crittershy.
And we'll see you guys next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.